Hi, everybody. Welcome to another edition of the Casino Business Podcast. This is a very, very special edition because we have got a recipient of the Lifetime Achievement Award in Casino Marketing. He's founder of Raving Consulting. He's been in the gaming industry for 50 plus years. We have Dennis Conrad here today. Dennis, thank you so much for being here.
Greg, it's my pleasure. I've been looking forward to doing this.
Wonderful. Well, hey, we've got a lot of ground to cover, so let's get to it. I love hearing entrepreneurial stories. So can you share how you first got into the casino industry and then what inspired you to start your entrepreneurial journey?
Well, the how I got into the industry is a long story, but I'll make it real short. But I graduated from Stanford at a golf scholarship there. I thought I was going to be a professional golfer. That I found out real quick at Stanford that wasn't going to work out. But so I went down another path, and I was going to go to law school, and I blew that off real quickly. So I blew off golf, I blew off law school, but on my way back to law school, I'm from Buffalo, New York. I met my wife to be in Iowa, visiting a friend there in Iowa on my way back to Buffalo. And that was kind of the end of it. Fell in love, met her, blew off Buffalo, which I always like California better than Western New York. Although Buffalo's not a bad place. I'm still a Bills fan. So met her, fell in love. She had a car and $1,000, and we traveled and landed, busted and disgusted back out west. And we lived in Needles, California. I was a Motel 6 desk clerk when the rooms were $6. And on weekends and then weekdays, I was a substitute school teacher. And she worked at a local coffee shop, which was called Sambo's, which no longer exists. But that's how we started. Used to go to the casino in Laughlin. One thing led to another. Pretty soon we're working in Laughlin, and that started our journey. So that's my entree. The background was I was a gambler all my life, gambled on the golf course for spending money, played poker with my mom when I was 10 years old at the neighbor's garage with the ladies. Me and one of the kids there, they let us in the games, playing for pennies and nickels. So there's all this background. So gaming kind of was interesting, made a lot of sense, and I kind of just fell into it.
And so you got into gaming in Laughlin. And so how did you get your start? Were you a dealer? Because obviously, or anybody that knows you knows that you are just a legend specifically in casino marketing and thinking about the things from the customer perspective. And but yeah, so maybe you could talk about how you started and then how you kind of got into who you became.
I was in Laughlin. I started as a keno writer. Then I became a little bit of a backup casino relief shift boss. And then my wife got into the dealing end of it, but we didn't get to deal in Laughlin. There's a whole bunch of stories around all of this. We ended up leaving Laughlin. And, I was a bartender at one of the other casinos in Laughlin. And then we went to Jackpot, Nevada to break into dealing, went from Jackpot to North Lake Tahoe, then right to Vegas. So there were dealers from the late 70s into late 60s, 76, 77 into the mid 80s, 83, early 80s. So right to Vegas, dealt downtown at the California Club, and then right to the Strip, dealt at the Stardust when the mob owned it. So that was my frontline career. My wife was a dealer the same. She got tired of it. She was tired of the smoke and people, screaming at dealers, and she liked it for a while. But she's from Iowa, farm world, so that was interesting. So when it was time, I said, "Listen, if you don't need to do this anymore," and that's when I said, "I need to start my career anyway," because I had about 7-8 years of being on the front line. It was a fun time. Trust me when I tell you, the dealer environment in the mid 70s to the early 80s was that's a whole book, but. So she retired from that, and I was looking at what's my step. I mean, I just promised her that I was going to, get into this reel, and she could retire from that. And we talked about a family, which we started shortly thereafter. So I looked at what was around, and I said, well, I wasn't sure how to break into the management side of things. I wasn't sure if I wanted to. Back then, juice was a term that you heard around Las Vegas. It was who you knew and not experience you had. College graduates were not, highly sought after in the gaming world. The mob still ran a couple joints. They were on their way out. But so I looked what I was going to do. I was going to get out. I thought, well, there's nothing really here for me. All the guys with juice are blocking my path to management. And it didn't seem, I didn't tell anybody I was a Stanford graduate. It was like, that was almost a negative, because they were thinking like, well, who the hell is this guy? What's he doing in the casino business in Las Vegas as a Stanford graduate? So I was pretty low key about all that. And then, so one thing led to another, and I said, well, my break came when there was a position I worked at the old Holiday Casino, among other places, after startup, as a dealer, then a floor person. And this opening came up for one of the first gaming instruction programs in the industry, how to teach people how to play the table game. So I became, and I put in for it because I thought it was interesting, and my shtick on the crap table, that's what I ended up dealing most of the time. I was an excellent crap dealer, made a lot of tips, and was great with the people. I said, well, that's something I really would like, I think. So I put it out there.
So was that something that a casino was putting on? Like, hey, we want to educate gamblers, make it feel comfortable to play table games. This was a third party. Okay, so it was one of the casinos.
It had just started. I don't think we were the first one. There was one that did kind of a half-assed job at it. But someone saw it at our place and said, we can do this. And there was a guy did it before me, did it for about 6 months, and he wanted to move up in the ranks of management. So the position became open. I said, that's something I think I could do. So I really made a big whoopty-do about it. I mean, I had the bells and whistles, and I had a program, and I had some worst gambling jokes you ever heard. And I was a personality, and I had to wear this captain's outfit because we were the Holiday Casino at the time, which was known as the ship on the strip. So it was this theme, but I was really this character, and it was fun lessons, and I made it simple for the people to understand how these games were played, especially at craps. I took a no-nonsense approach to give them the real deal, not try to just give them the basics so they get out there and hang themselves on the game without knowing how to play. I give them all the reasons. Here's the best bets. Here's what we do this. Here's how a card counter would do this. Here's what the thing is. So what I was doing was building trust. So they loved the lessons. They felt, oh, you're going to get the right scoop from Dennis. Now, did they go and become professional gamblers? No, they had their own superstitions. It was like throwing stuff against the wall. Some of it sticks, and people are going to do what they want to do, which created some consternation for me with the bosses when they heard me talking about the theory of card counting to the players at the table. They said, well, I'd be wising them up, which kind of up me to no end, but I continued, but a little more on the sly with my approach because I knew that was working. So one thing led to another. Then I got into my marketing career, and I was special events manager and put on some blackjack tournaments, and then we had a couple slot tournaments. We didn't have a host network of any note. We had 2 slot hosts at the time. Very successful casino, a Holiday Casino. Had just a dynamic slot business on the Las Vegas Strip that the bigger properties would die for. I mean, it really was special. So I got into that, and pretty soon, and then my mentor came from Atlantic City, and now I became the special events manager, casino marketing manager, then director. Now I'm in charge of this, that, and the other. And it was like getting on a treadmill and just running really fast. But when you get into questions about the mentors, that was a key part of me developing. That's how it kind of all started. I was kind of looking to get out, and then I knew there were opportunities coming. Atlantic City had opened, but I didn't want to go there. And I just figured, well, this sounds like something might lead to something. It did, and created all kinds of opportunities for me and led to the management career and then the executive career.
Well, I mean, gaming's been growing nonstop for decades now, and there's obviously you didn't have to leave the inside of working for a casino. So what was it that prompted you to launch Raving Consulting?
Well, the steps in the interim were, there was this position opened up here as they were preparing to go out into the world of riverboat gaming and Indian gaming, and preparing for that. This was a Phil Sackery brainchild, which was brilliant. He realized that, hey, if we get half these gigs we're swinging at in these jurisdictions, we don't have the people to run them. We got a couple of casinos, but we're going to need a whole bunch of people. And he realized it didn't take geniuses to run casinos. They just needed some basic knowledge and some basic principles. So he said, let's start a program called the Harris Institute, where we're going to take our people from inside. It was called Prom Companies at the time, and they had a hotel division with Holiday Inns and Hampton Inns and Homewood Suites and all kinds of stuff like that, Embassy Suites. And so he wanted a program, and my predecessor did one version of it, and then went to become VP of casino operations in Shreveport when they got to Shreveport Casino. And so he was trying to my arm to take over so he could leave, right? And I said, well, this sounds pretty interesting. But so the gig was I'd get 25 or 30 people from the Harrah's, Holiday Corp, Promise Companies network that would come in. And my goal was I had a week-long program. Here's what the casino business is all about. And there's a lot of ways to do that. And my buddy that was the one that did it, one edition of it before I took over. He kind of did it in conjunction with UNLV. They wanted to put some, academic cred around it and this, that, and the other. And I viewed it completely differently. I said, we don't need the academics. We got all the knowledge we have within this organization. And we want to show these people the real deal that are going to work in these casinos. So my approach to it was find the casino chief that could show people how casinos are taken down. Bring in the recovering compulsive gambler to highlight that issue and how important that is in our industry, because no one was really into that yet or talking about it. And just kind of take them into the count rooms instead of talking about, well, here's a sheet on how much coin was dropped. At the time they had coins, how much coin was dropped and how it happened. No, take them into the count room and show them how that happens. Get them up in the eye in the sky and watch what the surveillance guys are watching on the floor every time. So it was really down and dirty. And a lot of these people had never worked in a casino, certainly, but had not even been to Vegas somewhere, had never gambled. So it was probably my breakthrough, because it got a lot of wow from these people that went back to Memphis, which was our home office at the time, and said, wow, this is a great program. So I knew I was onto something, but I liked the fact I was being straight with people, and I took that approach and started Raving Consulting. You want to be straight with people. The other approach I took was, it wasn't me that did the teaching. I just found the best people in the business that I could. And that was the key for me starting Raving. I said, I don't want to be a consultant and do all the work and be a one-man show. And I also don't want to be a guy that hires 20 people and has a big payroll with all these experts. But I like the fact that I cut my teeth building this educational program for Harrah's Institute by using the best in the business that I could find in a specific discipline and putting them on stage, and then just coordinating the program, much like I did the Raving conferences. Bring the people in, put the program together and the whole flow of the program, and just make it a wow. So I took that approach, and I said, well, if I'm going to do a consulting company, I said, that sounds like a good approach for me. Just network. Don't hire them because they're expensive, and you can't pay them unless you got work for them, right? So we started the whole partner program, and we've called it various things: Raving Partners, Raving Associate. But these are, in my mind, best of breed people that have a specific expertise for the gaming industry, and they, associate with Raving, and we put out their services when the specific service is called for by whatever work it is we find. So that was the concept, and it worked really strong with the Institute, and I thought it worked pretty good for Raving. We didn't have every piece, but we had a bunch of them. There are some challenges if they're not getting enough work. It's like, hey, I haven't gotten any security surveillance work yet, so we haven't any calls for it. So they're kind of counting on us to be the rainmaker for them, which in a sense we were, but it worked best when they had their own business and their own successful product already, and didn't come to us and sit back and say, hey, bring me some business. That's not the way that can work, at least the way I had it set up. So that was kind of, a little bit of that.
So, I remember I was in the corporate world for a while, and I always had an idea of what I wanted to start. And for me, it was my oldest son was born, and I'm like, all right, if I don't make this jump now and start the business, I never will, because the more responsibilities you have, the more difficult it is to, ditch the golden handcuffs and lose that salary. So what was it for you, where clearly this was a great experience for you? You saw what worked. Sounds like you made a lot of great contacts, but what was it for you that was like, okay, I'm in, I'm starting Raving?
Well, I'd like to say there was some great thought that went into it, but the catalyst was I had taken from the Harrah's Institute. I got recruited. They thought I was this big master, culture builder and educational wonder. And I got recruited to be the vice president of employee training and development at Circus Enterprises right before Mandalay Bay bought them. And the goal was to change the culture of the company and turn it into things and have executive development and customer service training and do all the things that was very rich in the Harrah's world. So they thought I was the guru to do that. probably wasn't, but I certainly was smart enough, had enough experience to know I could at least fake the role once I got into it, and probably could be successful. So I took the gig for a hell of a lot more money than I was making running the Harris Institute. But after 6 months, the company gets sold, new people come in. They were old people that used to work for Circus. I had a 3-year contract, which my mentor suggested I get. He said, this company, you want to make sure that, because anything can happen. That's exactly what happened. New people came in, took over, and they sat down. They had just created these 5 new corporate positions like mine: corporate technology, corporate, we're going to have a little, it wasn't a huge corporate enterprise, but it was a smaller corporate enterprise to execute the strategy to change the culture at Circus, and instead of being cheap and pink, and have it kind of grow into something. There was a vision there, but I didn't get that far. But after 6 months, new people came in to buy the company, sat down the 6 people that had been hired for all new corporate gigs and said, we're not going to do any of that stuff. So those that didn't have a contract were gone, and I had a contract, so they had to come to me. And they were very nice. And they said, listen, we don't believe in any of that stuff. So, and I'm thinking I had a buyout clause in my contract. Here it comes, my offer to sit on the sidelines for 2.5 years and my next move for, 90% of my salary. But they said, well, what else do you do? I said, oh man, here it is. They want me to keep working. So I fessed up and I said, listen, my background's in marketing. I was a marketing guy, casino marketing director. Your company needs a lot of help on the marketing front. And they were very nice. And they said, okay. They said, pick a property. Tell us where you want to go. So most people would have picked, Luxor had opened. They had Excalibur, Circus in Vegas. No one would want to go, you would think, to Laughlin. They had properties in Laughlin, and they had Circus in Reno. So there were some other ex-Harris people in the organization. My mentor actually jumped over to Circus. That's how I got over for the interview. He wanted to be his slot marketing guy at Luxor. And he didn't get to pick those people. It was a corporate decision. So so he kind of convinced me to come over, even though it was a totally different role than he was trying to bring me over there for. And his bottom line was, he said, how often are you going to have a chance to make $250,000 a year? And it was like, I'm going from making 3 times the salary, challenging job with a bright future. I mean, they were talking to me about being a GM in the Harris network, which would have been the ultimate step. But I'm still probably 2 steps away from that with my Harris Institute gig. So I made the jump. And it was like 6 months, it was over, because new people came in and said, we're not going to do any of that stuff. So what do you want to do? So I came up to Reno, because my mentor had taken the job. He was the GM at Luxor. He got bound for a new person that came in, and they gave him the same option. They put him to the number 2 person at Circus Reno as the table game VP. And so I said, can I come up there with you? He said, well, and the guy that became the GM was a good friend of Mike Ensign, who was one of the owners, the principals. And he was the GM at Circus Reno, who had been the GM at Harris in Reno. He said this little network of how things work at the old Holiday Casino, Harris, Las Vegas. I called him. I said, hey, you got room for one more? And he didn't care, because corporate was paying my salary. He said, yeah, come on up. So they had a marketing guy already. He probably thought he was on the way out when I came in. I said, no, I don't want to get in the way. I said, I'll find my spot here. You go anywhere. He was a good advertising guy. I had the casino marketing background, so I just carved out my niche and kind of became I don't want to over it like I was an assistant general manager, but our GM there was real cool, had a Harris background, very rich culture there. And he just kept giving me stuff to do and try, and I'd come with ideas, and he'd try some of them. And we had this little pocket of culture in a company that had pretty much a culture void. Circus Enterprises, very strong formula, but a culture void. It was, here's how we do it. Everything's at the property level. The GM makes all the decisions. We make all the hires at corporate. There's only a couple of big jobs. So that was, so we had our little pocket of culture brought from Harris, and we were doing things that sometimes didn't even know stuff that we were trying and doing, pretty innovative stuff. So, and then my contract ended, and new people were there. They didn't know me from Adam. They didn't want me for the position I was hired for. So I knew I had to think of something else. And my wife said, I said, well, what do you want to do? I said, I'm getting paid like a GM, but I don't have any GM background. I could put in for a GM. Probably in Indian gaming, if it had been a little further along, that might have been an option. Because they take some chances and they take people that are smart and have had executive experience, but not necessarily GM, which I think is smart of the tribes. So I said, either I got to go take to make what I've been making, I got to go take a big marketing job somewhere. We have to move, or, I said, one thing I've been thinking about is maybe starting a consulting company based off the principles from the Institute and packaging all these smart people in the business. And she said, well, whatever you want to do, we like it in Reno. And my wife and I have a farm girl. For her, Reno is like Iowa, smaller cities in Iowa. Reno's probably a little bigger than some smaller cities, but with Walmart. So she thought that was great. She said, whatever you want to do, I'm behind it. So, as much as I tried to blow everything I saved in my nice 3-year gig, I couldn't. So I said, okay. I said, we'll take 100,000 and we'll use that. If we don't make it by the time we use up 100,000, then we'll take another strategy. So I put the pieces together and started, trying to go from there. And the 100,000 was gone in about 14 months. It was incredible to find out what things cost. It cost me $15,000 for a logo development and to build our booth display for the gaming shows. Because right away I said, well, we got to do the gaming shows, which I'm not sure, looking back, if that's the best strategy right away, but that's what I did. And the first year, so doing 111,000, I did 11,500 in revenues. So it makes you wonder why you'd want to continue, right? Well, yeah. It was like a couple things happened. I know this is one of the questions. A couple things happened that kept me going. One is I liked the concept. I'd found a couple of really, really good partners that, were part of Raving. Not like 3 or 4 people, Steve Brown being the main guy, who you know well from, he used to own Cactus Jack's Casino, became the PD guy and the customer service guy for Raving. Great, motivational, terrific. And a few other people, but I don't have any work for me, much less them. So I'm thinking, how long am I going to keep these people, right? So we got a gig at, guy used to read my columns. I've written columns for 30 years. Used to read my columns, was a finance guy at the Mirage. He was brought in as the GM to open Beau Rivage. And he had no reason no thought on how he was going to do this, but he was tasked with bringing someone in. Win like to have an on-site, when a place opened, to have like an on-site in-house shopping program with their people doing the shopping to find out on the fly what's wrong when they open, so they can make quick changes and do things right and make it better for the guest right away, which I think is great. So, but he didn't have a company to do that. He hadn't done it before. He read my stuff. He thought I was smart. He liked my thinking process. He thought I was culturally progressive, like Win might be. So he called me. He said, hey, what are you doing? I said, what do you want me to do? So I need to create this program where we take our own people and use them to shop at opening. I said, okay. So we started a process, but it got so chaotic. They had so many issues at opening. The rooms weren't ready. Only a couple of restaurants were ready. So and all these people are running around crazy, and I'm trying to harness the executives tasked with all this important opening work to kind of sit down so we can create this program. They can do more work to shop their casino once it opened. It ended up with me just becoming part of the team and doing stuff like, solving the parking problems at opening. They had some issues with the uniforms. The automated system wasn't working. So I was a firefighter. But that was the start. And the other big thing that happened was the start of the conferences. That was the thing that not only gave me a revenue stream, but gave me something that I thought was very powerful in terms of growing business. And there was a company that did, I can't remember their name, but they did some training for the tribes. So it was small groups, small conference programs, small training programs, and some of it was nuts and bolts stuff for accounting and regulatory and stuff. But they had one on marketing, and it was a casino, because tribes were just now getting into casinos. And so what they did was they found somebody they thought knew a lot about marketing, right? It was an advertising agency. So they did it one time, and then they couldn't do it the next year. And I had nothing against advertising agencies, but casino marketing is much broader than that. And back in the day, everything hung their hat on advertising to the detriment of good casino marketing and VIP stuff and all this casino promotions and all that. And advertising was the big 800-pound gorilla, right? And I always didn't like that. So they said, well, hey, this group can't do it this year. And I don't know if they read something by it. They said, hey, someone said or something, can you do that for us this year? So I said, sure, I can. So I took my approach. It wasn't anti-advertising, but it talked about all this other stuff. And they had 20 people there, and it was in Florida. And I brought Steve Brown with me, and our thing was pretty good. I mean, we were good presenters, and we were very, very much knowledgeable and had a good thought process about the business. That's what these people needed to hear, not just all this advertising crap. I don't mean to call it crap, but so we did it. After that was over, I said, I don't know if this is any good to do. And then they paid me, $300 or something. I said, I don't know if this is going to get me anywhere to get in front of 20 people once a year for $300. So I went back to him. I said, listen, by this time I've got a lot of contacts in the industry from the Institute days. All these people are out in the business. Now I've gotten some tribal connections. A lot of people have read my stuff. I said, listen, you can make this a lot bigger. I said, let me find you the place to have it. I'll get you a tribal casino. I think I can get 75 or 100 people instead of 25. And I'll put the whole program together, and I'll bring the people in. Again, the Harris Institute approach. I'll bring experts in to have the different topics addressed. And so they said, fine. So I did that, and I did everything I said they would. They had great revenues, but they weren't real comfortable with an outsider who had all the relationships, all people flocking to me. They had the company and the program, and everyone's coming to talk to Dennis and Steve and all these people because we're getting them all excited because they know we're the real deal. They're a training company. So I said after this, and there was an issue with me getting paid because there were some benchmarks that if we got so many people and they made so much money, I had an additional piece so I could make 2,000 instead of 300, right? So they were slow at paying me, and they were kind of snitty, and it was like, I just think they resented someone else coming in who they felt was stealing their business. I wasn't trying to steal their business. I would have done it for them forever because I like the exposure in front of 75, 100 casino marketing executives from Indian country. That's a great marketing tool for my burgeoning consulting company. So, well, shit, we can do this ourselves. So we did. We started our own, and that became our first Indian gaming marketing conference, which, and if one conference is, well, then two are better. Then we had 2 a year. And then we got into the topic conferences, the PD conference, which was the one real good topic conference, which really sprouted. Steve did a customer service conference. We did a casino promotions conference. We tried to do a leadership conference. And pretty soon we were having a conference a month. And I was killing Chris at Raving because she's running around trying to coordinate all these details and getting the hotel properties. And so that was, so we had to kind of cut back to what the core was there. But that was good because it got us seeing that network events, not just conferences per se, but like the networking parties that Raving had at the gaming shows, that those are very important in terms of growing your business.
And so that sounds like it was a big turning point in your business. So the Beau Rivage sounds like that may have been your first kind of paid consulting.
First real project.
First real project. But then the shows, was that the real unlock where all of a sudden you had people come to the show and then it led to conversations that would then have consulting?
Correct.
Okay.
Which is why you see companies now that do conferences for that very same reason. I think we were one of the first to do it as an adjunct, but you can't just do it. You can't just do it and have people pay to get on the podium. What you have to do is you have to have straight, honest discussion, and you can't compromise that. I was always big on that. A lot of conferences will have, okay, if you get a booth and pay the sponsorship fee, we'll let you on the podium. You don't know if they can speak or not, or can talk or cannot, out from the podium. So I kept those lines very clear, which got me some business. And I irked a few people as, we just spent $5,000 on a booth and a sponsorship and you're not letting me speak. We don't know what you're going to say. And the topics that we've outlined, you don't speak to those topics. So I kept the educational part separate from, but the other big thing that happened that was, I guess, for the start of Raving, Steve Brown, one of the guys was a CFO at Majestic Star in Indiana, Gary, Indiana. And I had talked to him for a couple of years, but he went through my Harris Institute program. Now he's a CFO for, I guess it was before Donald Trump had it. It was Don Barr had it. So he's down in this market that has all new employees, all of whom never worked in a casino, and many of whom didn't have a job, hadn't had a job in a long time. I mean, really a depressed employee base that this was designed to help energize the city, which was I think, a good idea. He calls me and he said, you guys do customer service training? I said, I'll get back to you. So I call up Steve Brown, and you probably know him a little bit. What a character he is. I said, Steve, and his whole story at Cactus Jack's is an amazing story. I said, Steve, we do customer service training. He says, oh yeah, we swing at everything. I said, okay. I said, we got a call. So we put together the proposal to come and do that. And that was the start of, Steve Brown's done 100 customer service training gigs from that point on. And he became the go-to guy. And one of the first ones. There were some people out there, but his was the real deal stuff. It was from somebody that worked in a casino. It wasn't an educational company, which I don't mean to, dismiss what they do, because there's a lot of value in some people that I've seen come to the gaming industry from an educational background, training background. But there was something special about a guy who could get up in front of a group and talk and motivate and talk about the real deal that was really casino. So I did the first one with him, but it was mostly his program. But I wasn't going to be the one doing this. I could see that he liked it because it fit into his Cactus Jack's philosophy of customer worship. So he kind of created the whole thing. And from there, we had something to sell. So Steve became the first growth piece other than the conference of Raving. So, now we got a guy that does customer service training. He's the go-to guy in the industry. So that part sprouted. Once we did the PD conference, that part sprouted. We started PD work. And I said, Steve, if you can do the customer service stuff, I know you never were a PD guy. You owned your own casino. You were the main PD guy. I said, do one of those, do that same stuff over here and make it appropriate for PD guys. So then we had that all to ourselves for a while. A few other people came off, and I think Nick Ippolito's a quality resource for the industry, but we were there first, and we tapped some veins of business that were in some of our partners, our associates, had more call for business than others. So some people, our security and surveillance guy, God bless him, terrific, knows the business upside and down, but we just weren't getting calls for it. Plus our focus was more marketing and operations and that kind of stuff. And we didn't have links until we got Amy Hergenrother. And that was the other big piece that happened. We got a professional salesperson. And that made a huge difference for our company. She sat me and Steve down, and she had a professional background from Ryder Transportation. I don't know if you know her background with Ryder. She was a top performer back in New Hampshire for their Northeast division. She was absolutely terrific. She had some real tragic things happen with members of her family, and she just couldn't do it anymore. The fire went out. Found her dealing craps in Reno. She came to Reno. If you looked at what could she do next, she was really distraught for a couple of years. And so I got to know her a little bit. I said, where'd you come from? Because she was a delightful person. Couldn't deal craps a lick. I said, well, I was in sales. And we've been talking about getting a salesperson. And so I asked him, but when we brought her on board, and I said, take 6 months to learn the business. She knew a little from having worked, and she was, a relief pit boss or relief floor person pit. So, but that background was good, that she got a feel for, she understood the Players Club. She understood some different things. So I said, take 6 months though. We'll pay whatever you were making, and we'll go from there. And you tell us when you're ready. But in about, 3 weeks, she was rocking and rolling. She sat Steve and I coming down, because he and I were the business development people. Mm-hmm. And we weren't salespeople. We didn't know the first thing about sales. We were enthusiastic. So we liked to get in front of people and tell them how wonderful we were and how all the great stuff we had would help them. And she sat us down and she said, no, you can't go down that way. She said, the way you have to do this is you have to sit down and find out what matters to them. Find out what the pebbles in the shoes are. You don't even tell them anything about you. You just ask questions to find out all about them. So, okay, that sounds really good to me, which makes a lot of sense, right? So that was the start of her turning it over to her, so I could work on coming up with other crazy ideas for us to pursue. And Steve didn't have to go hustle his own business once, we got a lead on something.
One thing I want to go back to that I thought was really interesting is you mentioned that you had a column that you're writing for a while, because nowadays, it's I think common knowledge in marketing, hey, you got to produce content. That's kind of the buzzword now, content. And I think that's fascinating that back then, before people were probably even calling it content, you produced a column which built a brand for you. So I guess what started you, because now, if I got the timeline right, it sounded like that was even before you launched Raving. So correct me if I'm wrong, but then, what was kind of the thought process behind the column? Where was it published? And tell me about that.
Well, I had this deal up in where I'm not, like an assistant GM, marketing guy, filling out my contract. And I got to know some people at UNR. We tried some stuff with them and some internship stuff and this and that. And it's some innovative stuff. And I got to have a meeting with someone at UNR, and I think it was Bill Eadington, he was the gaming guru. He used to do that whole UNR executive development program, which UNLV now does after he passed away. And he was just brilliant. He was the gaming guy, and he was the nicest man and the smartest man, knew more about the industry than anybody. And so we're having lunch with him and a couple of the execs from Circus, and he brought with him, the guy's name was Bill Dorn, I think, and he was the editor, owner, publisher of Casino Executive back in the day. And he had all these columnists. I know what people sound like now with all these podcasts and online stuff and CDC online gaming reports, that actual gaming paper publications, but that's all it was back then. And he had just lost his marketing columnist, who was Richard Schutz, and you may know that name. He writes now for Gaming Reports, and he was back in the days of Lyle Berman and Lakes Gaming and Indian Casinos, and he was the CEO of the Stratosphere for a while, and then he went to a regulator with California. He was the head of the California Gaming Commission. Now he's on that side of the business. Now he's writing for Casino Gaming Reports, and he's kind of taken up this whole thing about making our gaming regulations in the regulators more savvy and more paying attention to the customer, and not letting these big bad companies, if you let them screw the customer and put in some safeguards and all this kind of stuff. He had just resigned his column, that he was the marketing column for Casino Executive. He asked me, "Did you want to do this?" I said, "Sure." So I've always been very candid in my columns, and that was a good idea, certainly. But I remember it was my second or third column, and I don't know what I said in the column, but someone at Circus Enterprises, who now I no longer had a close relationship with, I was on the bench up in Reno, being a substitute up here while my contract expired. And I said something that was candid and true. They just didn't like the way I said it. Like the PR aspect of it didn't make them look, quote unquote. But I said, I got to be careful with this stuff. But then that gig ended, but the column continued, and then I'd be as outspoken as I wanted to. So I didn't try to just be outspoken. I just tried to be honest, which probably looks to some people as outspokenness, but that's okay, as long as I feel like it's honest and true. So that started that. And then at 30 years, the Casino Executive got bought by Casino Journal. Then I was for Casino Journal, and then Casino Journal went away 5 years ago, and now so now CDC Gaming Reports, and you get to know all these people. And Jeffrey Compton asked me, he said, "You want to write?" I said, I've been, because I had a little gap there after Casino Journal went under of a couple of years. I said, yeah, I'd take the gig, and I've enjoyed doing that once a month on their Wednesday, the first Wednesday of the month, in the morning flash is Conrad's column. You could pull it up on their website too. All my columns are there. There's 37 or 8 columns there now, if you want to look at all of them in one place. Some I'm very proud of, some I don't know.
Hey, but I've heard with writing like that, it's all about consistency. So do you have a routine that you go through to make sure you're pumping out new content every week?
Well, I hate deadline pressure. So what I do is I like to crank out 3 at once. So, because when I build them by the quarter. So I get all my quarterly columns in, and I get them in ahead of time. And my editor, who's Deke Castleman, who's brilliant, terrific. I love him. He worked for Anthony Curtis in the Las Vegas Advisor. So he's familiar with the whole influencer world and stuff. But and Anthony Curtis is sticking his toe in that water too, and they're longtime friends. Stories there. So he appreciates me getting him the columns, 3 months in advance, and he doesn't have to go begging for last minute deadline stuff. But the process is, from all the casinos I visit and all the things I read online, all the things, I make little notes. I said, ooh, it's something will pop out and go, that'd be a good column. That'd be a good column. That'd be a good column. I just put them in my little pickle folder and I pull them out, and then it just flows out of me. So, and you never know what's going to cause it. And I just wrote, I don't know if you read it. It was, I think it was A Million Little Things was the title. And it got ticked off by my little favorite video poker bar. And the bartender, I gave him 100, and I said, can you give me 5 20s? And he gave me 5 20s. And he made a point, he had the 5 20s, made a point to make all the 20s line up the same way. So they weren't one upside down, but they're all facing the same way, which is exactly how I keep my wallet.
Yeah.
That's probably little CD stuff. But he said, yeah, that's what I do. He said, you'd be surprised. Most people do it that way. I said, really? But it got me thinking, like, here's a guy made a point, something that might please the customer, that, such a little thing, you wouldn't even notice it maybe, but it makes a little bit of a difference. And if you add up 1 million of those, so I came up with, 10 or 15 other little things that I started thinking, that's a good little thing. That's a good little thing. And made it into a column. So it's, that's a little bit of my column process.
Well, I think coming up when you did, I'm sure you saw some of these great entrepreneurs like Bill Hara and then Steve Wynn through Beau Rivage that definitely took the little things very seriously, and it led to big things and big success.
I can't give them credit for my focus on the customer. I've always had that. Part of it's being a customer and knowing how I like to be treated. I've gambled all my life, and I think it's a shame more casino executives don't do more of that. I mean, it's your business. And some of them are like, ooh, I would never do that. Why would you do that? You just want your money. You do it because it's your business, what your customers go through. Don't you want to know what it's like from their perspective? So what was the question? I got to.
No, it wasn't really a question. It was just a comment in that, because I worked at Harrah's, which obviously became Caesars. And I remember hearing stories about Bill Hara coming on.
Light bulbs and stuff. The light bulb was out, he'd go tell the manager. But it wasn't those people that got me thinking along those lines more, but it was Steve Brown and his Cactus Jack. I mean, that truly was customer worship. And the other one was Barona, which is the ultimate run, most customer-focused casino. And I've been in hundreds and still is, been there in a few years. It's just absolutely amazing. That was the bigger impact on me than the industry titans and like Barry Loveman and his whole thing about the service profit chain. And if our customer service scores increase, that's probably all true, but that didn't inspire me. Someone like Brown inspired me about having his customer advisory boards where he sits down with his best customers and they tell him how to run the casino, or Barona watching their managers on the floor not have offices and around handing out $20 slot vouchers to people and just thank them for being there. Or, hey, I see you haven't got any, those kind of things inspired me. I said, this is how a casino should be done. And there's very few run like that.
Well, I've read a lot of your columns. I know casino marketing, and I like that phrase, customer worship. I know that's something that you take very seriously. And I know we're running out of time, though, so I want to save that for another interview because I've got a lot of questions, and I've just enjoyed so much learning about your background, this entrepreneurial journey, and how you grew.
We probably only touched 3 or 4 questions here, but that's okay.
Yeah, well, one more before we wrap up.
Let's keep freewheeling it. That's I touch on some of the points here already, but what else you want to know to wrap up?
I'd like to wrap up on I'd like to know about Raving, kind of. So you built this business, and I know for a lot of entrepreneurs, it's tough to let go. It's that's something that a lot of people wrestle with, like when's the right time to sell or walk away. So maybe you can walk through like what it was, what was that decision like for you deciding to sell the business?
This is like the question 6, advice to casino entrepreneurs. I'll assume that.
Yep.
Well, what made me want to sell the business was I was, getting older and looking for my exit strategy and wondering how it was going to happen. So, and that is not necessarily something that's a given. I thought it'd be easier and I thought it would be bigger, but it was still very fruitful, and I was glad. And Deanna and Brady Scott are wonderful people, and I'm glad I found them. But my advice to casino entrepreneurs, this is getting off the thing, but that's what made me want to do it. Was, my wife she was supporting the business. She was doing the accounting, and she's not an accountant, but she was doing it, and she did a good job of it. And she was doing all the jobs no one wanted to do, and making sure all the regulatory this and that was handled. And she was like, she likes to do jazzercise, and she likes to make stuff. She knits, she sews, she does all kinds of things. But that's her creative aspect. She said, how are we going to get out of this? I said, okay, leave it to me. So then I actively searched to do that. One, to find the right fit. I thought we'd be a good fit for a tribe, because there's tribes out there helping other tribes and management deals for tribes. I said, why would you try to put all these people together? I've already got an effective, consulting group, and they can manage casinos, they can market casinos. Why wouldn't you just put that under your umbrella and leverage that to help more tribes and have bigger deals? But that didn't get me anywhere. Maybe I didn't do that right, but that part didn't work out. But I'll just give it to you now anyway. My advice to casino entrepreneurs, this doesn't get how do you get out, but my advice is learn about your potential clients, especially tribes. A lot of vendors, a lot of new people in the business, consulting companies, entrepreneurs. And I've heard it hundreds of times with Raving. We've got this great new whiz bang thing. God, it's great. God, your clients will love it. Forget about what the deal is, which typically is, if you show up your clients and we get a deal from it, we'll give you something. That was mostly the way it was approached to me. But find out about them first before you go trying to knock on their door, and beat them up, and try to get a meeting with the main guy and lean on somebody. Can you get this guy for me? Can you get to that guy for me? Find out about them, especially with tribes. What's their culture? What's their history? What's their management history? Who's been running it? How do they think about the business? Who are the families that are the decision makers with the tribe? And I learned that the tribal business is not like a company business, a corporate business. It's just like a family business, because there's always 2, 3, 4, 5 tribes that are in the decision-making power structure of the tribal government. And that was a really key for me to understand. Have a realistic view of how valuable or needed your product or service really is. There's some people think this is great for gaming, and I see it right away. No, it isn't. If you ask somebody who knows what they're talking about, no, it isn't. This product won't work in gaming. It won't work this way. And you think it's whiz bang, you'll show it to all these high rollers, and they're going to buy all these Lamborghinis, and you're going to have this business. And I said, no. Give value before you ask for value. That's the building trust component. What value are you giving to these tribes, to these companies, before you ask for value? And part of giving value for us was sharing our knowledge honestly, sharing good information, sharing ourselves, always open to a phone call. You want to ask us, and we can't say, okay, we'll give you a half answer, and we'll give you the rest if you sign us up to do some consulting. No, we'd give them everything we knew. And if they still had questions, they're going to come to us. That, I think, was good. And don't be a pest was my other thing. But
now going back to you touched on how important it is to understand the tribal entity, the casino. I would say casino, but it sounds like it's more than that. Like, how do you navigate that? Because that's a really interesting point. And that's something that I've definitely noticed, but have not had enough experience to call myself an expert or even knowledgeable, really. But how do you identify, like, okay, this person might not be the GM, but this is a key decision maker, and you touched on like how tribal history and different things all are important when making a deal or becoming business partners with a tribal entity. So maybe you can talk a little bit more about that, because it is definitely different than maybe selling to MGM or just commercial. They're looking at profits. So
well, Amy's the one to give you the right answer to that question, the fuller answer to that question, because she has names for the people in the organization. By her question-making process, I told you, ask questions. She told us, don't be the one that comes. When she asks questions, she finds out who the decision makers are. She finds out who the decision makers really are. She finds out who the people that are coaches. She calls them coaches that, like you, will help recommend you into the organization. She finds out, who the important people are. They might be the tribal secretary, but they have great influence within tribal government. She finds out the whole shape of that network, and that's how she knows where the pieces are, the people you talk to, a lot of times people walk into an organization and they treat the secretary at the GM's office, they don't treat them badly, but they kind of give them a, basic hello. And she says, the people are really important. She may have been with this GM for 20 years. She may have been the tribal secretary for tribal government, and she moved over to the casino side. Who you don't even know the connections that she has. So she can give you a much better answer than I can, but it speaks to the question-making process. When you see these people at functions at gaming shows, at Indian gaming this, Indian gaming that, making a point to sit down with them, and don't just blah, 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 talk about this, that, and the other. There's a little bit of that, all the time. But start asking them about their business, about how it's going, about this, that, and the other. And that, I think, opens up the floodgates to how you can, it'll show the way for you and how to approach these organizations, and being respected because you asked rather than told. I met a whole bunch of negative Vegas pushback when I got into first the Indian gaming, which was 70% of our business. I thought, we're from Vegas, people are going to be all over us. They didn't like Vegas guys. As not everybody, but as a general rule, their tribal view of gaming people from Vegas or big market casino cities later, like Reno and Atlantic City, they were always telling them what to do. They didn't want to listen to this. We already know how to do this. You shouldn't be doing it this way. They didn't like that. So, once you find out, and then once you can appreciate that they have built up a wealth of knowledge and experience, they know how to run their business better than you know how to run their business. And if you can show that and respect that and ask for their input all along the way without telling them you got to do it this way, I think that's a key to being successful. And so that was a big part of it. But the other part for me, and this was my part of it, and I always, and it goes broader than tribal, but I wore my advertising hat today. This is the Nota Begay Foundation, which Raving became our charity of choice. It was a tribal charity of choice. There's a connection there. Stanford golf team. Nota was 20 years after me. He's tribal member, and he had a business that golf courses. He had all this network into Indian government and Indian gaming facilities. And plus I had relationships that he didn't have. So it was good. It was good for both of us, but that's not why I did it. Although that was the payoff. I did it because I liked what he was doing for tribal kids. His foundation helps with nutrition, physical activity, and making their lives better. Because, the diabetes rate on reservations with kids and obesity rate and all that kind of stuff. And he was making a difference, and his foundation still is making a difference. So I made sure we got involved with that, not with any expectation. And I tried to lean on all our partners and companies, and several did, supported this event or that event. But we raised, I don't know, I want to say it's up to $600,000 for the NV3 Foundation. Wow. Raving still does it. I don't know to what extent. I'm not close to Raving anymore and close to details and all that stuff. But that was, our parties became fundraisers. I had to pay it into a Raving party. It was $20. Started at 10, then became 20. People were telling me, no one's going to like that. They can go to the free IGT party. I said, no, they're going to like the fact that this supports, a foundation that really benefits Indian country. And they did. Some people gave 100. It was great. I heard a couple said, "Why do I have to pay for this kind of?" I said, "That's okay. There's other parties." Yeah. So that was my aspect, to make sure on some level you find a way to be seen as being and there's other quality charities in Indian country, but to be seen as part of that. I mean, the other approach is, if you're a vendor that serves 50 tribal casinos, is you pay the tariff to support every tribal charity golf tournament, an event or thing that they lean on for, because they're doing business with you. And we did some of that, but we liked having one big difference that spanned more than just that tribe. So that was my approach to that.
Smart. Yeah, that's interesting. It is funny how I went in as an outsider and working in, technology sales, and just thinking like, all right, if I can sell just the bottom line, we could drive profit, then you'll win every deal. But you just find that it may not, they're making plenty of money. They don't care about that. They care about getting more likes on their Instagram page than that tribe that they're competing with. And it's just, it's really interesting. I'm sure you saw that a million times, just how many different motivations different tribes have beyond just maximizing the bottom line.
That's a good point. And it's not that they're not adverse to making more money, but it's how they make it. And there's some things they want to, like early on when tribes started doing golf course, I just read something in some online something that there's like 66 tribes have 88 golf courses now. And when they first started building them, we were out there and we're consulting with them on the property, and it's like, this thing's losing money. It's going to always lose money. And so I didn't put it right then and say, hey, you can't be doing golf courses. That wasn't our style. But I sat down with someone. He said, don't touch that. One, a lot of the tribal leaders and tribal members, like to golf. And the bigger part was they've lived in this community a long time. When people looked down at the Native Americans and, didn't treat them well, and they had nothing to be proud of. And this golf course here that they overspent on, and got a whole whoop-de-doo thing. They said, that makes them feel really good. And what price are you going to put on that? I said, good point. So, that understanding made me realize it's not always about profit. It's nice, but it's about relationships. We didn't get it because we got a lot of business because Amy's a great salesperson, but we've got business. It's like anything. Good word of mouth in the casino business is better than any you can buy or purchase or whatever. Word of mouth among the tribes is good. And once they trust you, and once they know you're straight shooters, once they know you're not going to give them halfway advice and then try to charge them a bunch of money, once they know you're not trying to stick around for a 5-year contract, once they know you're good people and that you care about them, it makes it a hell of a lot easier. Then they start coming to you. Of course, you got to have a company, a good product, good service, a good whatever. But so we got more from referrals than anything else in long-term tribal stuff. Now, they might have done one project for X amount of dollars on a customer service program, but guarantee, we're not going to come back and say, okay, what do you got next? What do you got next? Guarantee when they need something else, we're going to be their first call. And that to me was finding out how to really sell in the business by having the business come from them because they trust you, like you, and stay close to the people in the organization. People come and go. Consultants and service companies tend to leave when your guy, the GM, the tribal council chairman, leaves. There's either someone else or we don't need that kind of thing. So staying close to others that may not seem why you're staying close to them. I had one person who worked for a tribe, and he sat me down one time, became a good friend. And I said, you're very, very successful. The tribe loved him. And I said, what's your strategy? He said, what I found out is, to the point of tribes, there are several families. He said, well, there's tribal elections and this family's in and this family's out, or it's process, or more of the family's in and more of it out. And he said, my thing was, there's the in family in the power structure, and then there's the out family who was just there and now isn't out. And sometimes there's some bad blood along those lines with different families. And that goes back to history. That's not a casino thing necessarily. That goes back family histories. And he said, my point was, I always make it a point. He said, I'd like to stay in with the outs. Stay in with the group, the family that's out, but not too in. What we see is snuggling up to the outs by the ins, right? So I don't know if that's appropriate for tribal represent, but I think they get it. It's important that there's people that make decisions. You stay close to all the people that make decisions because you never know. You might be out anyway, but.
100%. No, it makes total. Yeah, because it's pendulum. It swings back and forth, just like how probably the whole Fortune 500 and all their lobbying firms, they donate on both sides of every election. And it's the same thing at the tribal level.
Yeah, and some group has a big accounting firm, and then if someone else comes in and they bring a new big accounting firm to come in, and all that time spent and stuff because they have a relationship. And that's this guys, and someone came in and looked at the books, and they might have been good, might have been bad, who knows? But yeah.
Well, Dennis, this has been awesome. I've enjoyed hearing your entrepreneurial story so much. I learned a lot, and yeah, there's just a lot of nuggets in there that I think any entrepreneur, especially in the casino space, can take with them. But then also casino marketers and people navigating the corporate ladder in the casino space. I think they'll learn a lot from your journey of breaking in the business and moving up. And I know there's a whole lot more ground to cover, and I hope you'll I know how busy you are, but hopefully we can schedule another time to kind of dive in these timeless tactics and strategies that I know you've seen work at places like Brona and other places around the country.
Well, I'll tell you candidly, I haven't been doing these. I've been asked a few times, and I haven't done it because either I wasn't sure about the format, I wasn't sure, I didn't know the person, or I knew the person and didn't like the person necessarily. I didn't know you well. We had chatted over the years, but we never sat down and talked. But I can tell you, I've enjoyed this thoroughly. I like your perspective. I like how you're asking the questions. Didn't go like I thought. I had this all outlined. It was going to be kind of an orderly fashion. I was going to hit all the bullet points and bring it in 30 minutes, and you could do the whole thing. I should have known better. That's not my style. I get going. I'm telling you stories about Becky and I in Las Vegas and Laughlin and this, that, and the other. We're off about this and tribal politics and how do you should have known that's be more like it was. So your challenge is probably editing. So and there's a trust factor here. I don't ask for any kind of control over anything. I just trust that you'll edit it to make some sense and not leave something in that may make me look like I said something I didn't mean.
No, I don't think it'll be much of a challenge. And no, I enjoyed it. I think we probably could have condensed it, but I think the details are the important part, is hearing like how you got from a dealer to the next spot to training the folks at the table games. And just, I love hearing all those steps, because I think that's where people really can learn from. And so you've got a fascinating story, and I'm glad we had enough time to tell it. And then I hope that when you see the video, you'd be like, you know what, it came out great, and we'll do it again. And we could talk about these timeless tactics and strategies that casino marketers and
that's a good point. Good point. What I just realized, a lot of the wisdom is in the stories. And that's why it took so long for me to get the points. I've got hundreds of stories that make a real good point around every one of the things that I'm saying. The stories made the points rather than the points made the story in most cases. So, I mean, I could tell you some stories. But anyway, I'll save a couple of them.
All right. Well, hey, for folks that, I think everyone's heard of you and they know you, but just in case this is the first time somebody's hearing about you, where would you point them to, learn more, find your columns, connect with you? Let everybody know where they can find you.
Well, they can go to all my columns of the last 3 years are at CDC Gaming Reports. So if they go to cdcgaming.com and go to, I guess it's reports, there's a click down menu. You go to reports, and then there's a click down button for insight. And those are all the writers that they have for CDC Gaming Reports. And then it'll ask you to pick any writer. And then you'll get all the writers, and scroll down to Dennis Conrad, and you can look at every one of my columns for the last 3 years, most of which I like. And the way they can reach me, and I'm always open to people asking me questions or reaching out to me and all that. Even work, although I'm not looking for work, because I'm very, very picky. I mean, if you read my last column, I talked about, what I want my final chapter to be. I think you did read that.
Yep.
But they can reach me at Dennis at Conrad, Dennis, DENNIS, at Conrad, CONRAD works, conradworks.com. So easy.
Perfect. Well, Dennis, thank you so much for your time today. I really enjoyed it, and I look forward to doing it again.
Great. Thanks, Craig.